Welcome everyone to another Lightning Talks. In fact, it's the first edition of the Lightning Talks 2025. So I'm very happy to start this first Lightning Talk of 2025 with a special edition. It's the APAC edition. So I've been running this Observing Lightning Talks since I don't remember 2 years, 1 year. I don't remember. Never mind. But I always wanted to do a special edition for APAC community, but also to have super great speakers from APAC. So I'm very excited that finally I'm able to do it. So if you are connected, welcome, and you will spend probably an hour or an hour and a half, depending on how deep we're going to chat with the speakers today. So take your drink, take a coffee, water, whatever you want. Chill out and listen to awesome talks that will happen in the next hour. So if you're connected, if you've never been to an Observer Lightning Talks, let me remind how the flow and how what will happen during this next hour. We'll have several things. So we will start with 3 Lightning Talks with 3 distinct speakers, and every speaker will have 15 minutes. To respect and the time and the flow, I won't take any QA during this first piece. So if you have any questions, note it down or drop them in the chat. So then later on, once we are in the panel discussion, which is the last piece, we will take the time to answer all the questions. And also I'll take the time to drop my questions to the speakers, because at the end, I'm here to learn as well as you, for sure. So for today's Lightning Talk, I have prepared an exciting lineup. I'm very excited about this. So I have 3 amazing speakers. So I have Daniel. So if you don't know Daniel, then it means that you don't follow what happens on Kubernetes, because Daniel is obviously behind the Learn Kubernetes, Learn KS. There's a website. They're doing a lot of training, a lot of very exciting content related to Kubernetes. So if you never heard about it, I would definitely recommend to check out their content, because it's just amazing. So I'm very excited to have Daniel here tonight, this morning for me, with me. He will deliver a talk and about observability. So not Kubernetes, but observability. So very exciting. I'm very excited to hear his journey with observability. The second speaker will be Liz Fong Jones. So Liz is I've been following her since I don't know, 20 years. Maybe I'm getting old. I don't know, but yeah, she started with Google. So I was watching and looking at her content, and she moved on to Honeycomb, great observability platform, and she's going to talk about, of course, observability as expected. And here we're talking about Observability 2.0, and I think a lot of things we can learn from her. So I'm very excited to have her tonight. And last, we will have Steven. So Steven has been an old friend. He's been also a performance engineer. We used to have the chance to meet when I was in the performance engineering landscape. And now he is running a podcast. So check that podcast site, Reliability. It's really great, really funny, really nice graphics. It's an amazing guy. So you'll see once you listen to Steven, you will clearly understand why Steven is great, and why I love him. All right, so I think I did enough promotion of those speakers. Maybe we should start with the first speaker of today's Lightning Talks. So let's start with Daniel. Hey, Daniel, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for the kind words. I think that was more than nothing more than I was expecting.
I'm sorry, I was sorry. Maybe it's the early morning journey for me. So I'm very all my love is getting out of my
or the extra coffee. One of the two, I guess.
I don't know. So what's the time? What's the time from your?
It's just past 2:00.
2:00
in the afternoon.
Okay, so it's so you're about to take your afternoon coffee, and
Yes.
I'm about to take my my morning coffee. So that's we have a coffee transition here for sure.
Yes, that's for sure.
All right. So as expected, I will leave you 15 minutes. So
Okay, yeah, I will
leave
try to
this.
do my best.
I'm sure you will do you will deliver an amazing job. So
Thank
I'll
you.
leave you 50 minutes and see you in 50 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for joining me today. So before I start, I'm just going to explain. So my name is Daniele. People call me with all sort of things. I don't mind. You can call me Daniele, Danielle. People make a joke of my name because I'm so much into Kubernetes and they shorten it D5E. I generally cover content on Kubernetes. I was a speaker at KubeCon. I'll be at KubeCon London to present a talk. And generally what I do, I just run, I teach Kubernetes, I run workshops on Kubernetes for a company called Learn Kubernetes. But today there is very, very, very little Kubernetes because I want to share my journey with OpenTelemetry, right? And this is a summary of my 15 minutes talk. So this is me at the beginning of 2019 when I joined KubeCon Barcelona. COVID was just about around the corner. And on stage, they announced OpenTelemetry as a result of merging two projects. And I was like, yeah, why should I care? And then eventually I sort of tried it and it was almost a magical moment. Okay, so that's basically my talk in 15 minutes, just summarized as a meme. So to explain my journey, and what I've learned using OpenTelemetry, I think we need to take a step back and understand what kind of problem I'm trying to solve. So if you know me, or if you don't, you probably heard of a collection of websites or just accounts that publish news on Kubernetes day in and day out. So this is a quick summary of the accounts I'm talking about. So there is Learn Kubernetes, Kubernetes Architect, Kubesploit. So we have a collection of accounts where we publish news. And the reason why we do that is because we think it's important for the community to be informed of what kind of articles are being published, or what kind of events are going to be happening soon, or what kind of job opportunities are there. And we started this very small in 2017, and the way it looks like is basically we just have brands, and on LinkedIn, for example, we publish the best news for this month. But how do these news get on LinkedIn, where you can read them and sort of explore these articles? Well, generally the way it works, at least in the beginning, I used to go and read stuff on Reddit. I used to go and read stuff on Medium, and I will basically just read the comments, try to engage with the content, and then I will, sort of read the article and make a note of it, and then repost it on the socials. And so this worked for a while, and it was like, a lot of people engaged and they find it useful, right? Imagine you having like every day you're receiving the best articles on Kubernetes, and you're learning, from what others are doing, from the knowledge that others are sharing. When I started in 2018, this was like good, right? I could do it maybe half a day. I would go on Reddit, maybe every day, 10 minutes, I would just collect the links. And then by the end of the month, I would basically just read like around 200 links, and I would have shared maybe once every other day. So the community in 2019 for Kubernetes was quite small, but things sort of got a little bit more interesting as Kubernetes got more interest sort of people got more interest in what Kubernetes is and how it works. Then they also publish more content, right? More articles, more events, more job opportunities. And by 2020, there were basically I was reading 800 links a month. And by that time, it was like so much, it was so painful. It was like I was spending maybe 40 hours a week just doing this job. And I had like a spreadsheet, which is, I don't recommend anyone doing. I mean, it was fine at the time, but it was rather painful. I would basically just collect everything into a spreadsheet, try to figure out what was worth resharing, then writing description, and then sharing it on social media. Terrible. Now it's 2024. This is probably a little bit unfair because I just checked the last month and it's 2,600 links. But that's basically the scale that we are working at. So we basically have we collect 2,600 links, and then we try to make sense and only publish the link that you think are going to be relevant, right? But how do you do that at scale? I mean, 2,600 links, reading 2,600 links is a lot of work. So what we do is we basically have we use a software called Node.js. Now it's heavily modified, but the basic idea is that there are several blocks you can compose together, and then we compose some of these blocks to collect news. Then there are other blocks which are designed to collect things such as events and job descriptions, and then there is one last block which is where I spend most of my time, and it's basically just curating the content. This helps me just look at the links and decide if they should be published or if it be rejected. Now, this is all good. And generally how it works is every hour we have got something like a scraper. The scraper will basically go and launch Chrome. And we have like a service which spawns Chrome as a service. And this Chrome as a service will basically launch a VM in the cloud, run Chrome, scrape the website, get the article back so we can read it and then decide what to do later. To store the results of the scraping, we have like a small microservice in Node.js, which is going to store the result. Well, pretty normal, but when we basically developed this, there were times where things went wrong, like terribly wrong. So if you ever done any scraping, you probably know that scraping is quite a brittle thing. So it just breaks for all kind of reasons, not just for web pages, but also for the kind of connections you have with the browsers, proxies, things can go wrong in so many levels. And when something broke, we basically had no idea if the problem was on the Chrome, on the Chrome inside the browser, basically. In the component, it was this basically dispatching this browser and creating these virtual machines, or the problem was when we initiated a connection with the browser itself. And I remember looking at the logs and I was like, okay, I've got 4 different pieces, and I need to go and look at the logs and figure out why it broke, right? And on average, I'm not joking, but on average, it was like, it would take probably an hour to go and look at each and every log and figure out what was going wrong. And it will basically go and change the code, redeploy everything, and try and figure out if things would improve. So people make jokes of, Node modules being a sink, but logs produced by all kinds of services, they tend to be even more. At least that was my experience. So that's basically when we tried to switch to OpenTelemetry. And OpenTelemetry was basically a nicer way for us to actually collect all of this information, and instead of just dumping them into log, trying to make sense of how these calls were initiated and what kind of components were involved in this process. And here you can see a very simple diagram which breaks down the same sort of 4 components, but this time as a waterfall sort of visualization. And changing to, these are the 4 components. Then changing to this was magical, because suddenly we had like an idea where things were going wrong, an idea where we were looking at, and we could dive into. It was so much quicker to actually go and identify errors and fix them. And by the end of it, it will basically, right now to fix a bug, it takes about less than 5 minutes to figure out what the issue is. I mean, that's for a general bug. I'm not saying for all of it, because of course it depends. So there are a few lessons that I've learned in this process. And then the first one is to do with auto-instrumentation. So when I started, then the simplest things to do was, okay, you have an application and OpenTelemetry makes it easy for you. You just require something and automatically you get everything going. I mean, the auto-instrumentation we use TypeScript and Node.js, so keep that in mind. The auto-instrumentation for Node.js has got like 46 different components that are installed in one go when you use the auto-instrumentation. And it is generally okay, but whoever set this up had basically some ideas, opinions on what should be an error and what not. So we used to have like a lot of alerts because people were trying to ask, we had like bots, automated bot accessing WordPress URLs, and that would trigger the automation for the auto-instrumentation to flag this as an error, which it isn't. Right? That was the first problem. So we sort of figured out that this auto-instrumentation wasn't great. And when the other problem with alerting was, when we started, we had this very simple Jaeger, which at the time didn't have any way to do monitoring or anything like that, and didn't have a way to do search. So I think one of the things that we learned very early on is that, yes, these logs are useful, these traces are useful, but the way to query them is very primitive, right? And it doesn't give you like alert, you can just search. So the tooling that you use does really matter, right? So you got no easy way to search. There was no alerting. You could have used paid products. So I remember the time I tried Honeycomb, I tried whatever tracing they've got, Microsoft Insights, I think, Azure Insights, a few others. But in the end, it's like, it wasn't very easy to figure out what I need to do and how to get those alerts. And the other thing problem that we had at the time was like, okay, if I want to really use Jaeger, then I need a way to query this data, and then Jaeger has got all of these different backends, and it was like very complicated. So at the time it was like, okay, it is too complicated. We're going to build our own. I know it sounds crazy, but that's basically what we did at the end. We basically just cut through the complexity and then just build our own. And I'll show you in a second why. So I think the complexity for OpenTelemetry comes in two parts. One is the backends and one is the SDKs. In the backends, we have like all these massive systems, which I understand we need to have because OpenTelemetry, we need to ingest a lot of data. And this is the example of Jaeger. But at the same time, and this is not enough, by the way. This is Jaeger. On top of Jaeger, you need other components to make it work and to ingest the data. But I think for some simple applications, we did so much less than that. So what we basically did was like a very simple code application. We just ingest traces and just store them in SQLite. That was it. That was our Jaeger. And the other things that we learned in the process is that all these OpenTelemetry SDK, so the main OpenTelemetry SDK, at least for the one from Node.js, has been written in a very unusual way. So we're very unusual for people coming from JavaScript. So using async hook, which is very advanced and no one uses it. It uses a very, very deep nested structure of objects. And most of it is actually designed to block the main thread, and it monkey patches everything, which is like, the result of this is basically super slow. So what we did, it was like, okay, what if we rewrite? So we basically, I think this is an article, very interesting article that I recommend reading on how to write OpenTelemetry in 200 line of codes. But that's basically what we did as well. It was like very, very simple. It's not as fancy, but it just covers 90% of the cases that we need. The other things that we sort of understood from doing this is that you embrace the OpenTelemetry, and the next time you check your storage, you realize that you're ingesting close to 10 gigabytes a day, just easily, right? Just blinking your eye is going to be 10 gigabytes a day. And of course, you can go back and you see, you look at Jaeger again, you say, oh, but they have this component called adaptive sampling. Okay, we can do this and that, we can be efficient on how we sample. But I think the reality is that most of the time, you don't expect this to work. I mean, you expect this to work in a certain way, but the reality is that you get less data. But what if we log less to begin with? Right? Instead of being sampling and doing very advanced things, what if we keep it simple? So I think the lesson learned for us was, okay, just log what you need. Don't log everything. Just log what you need. And the other thing is, since you're logging what you need, you can also derive metrics from whatever you're logging, whatever you're tracing, right? And that was like a good way for us to actually set up dashboard and say, oh, we could really care about these numbers, and we can just pull them from the tracing, right? We don't need on the Prometheus on top. We can just leverage the existing tracing data, aggregate the data, and just publishing on a dashboard as well. And that was like, okay, how do I do this? How do I choose what I show in the dashboard? Well, what do I care? What do I care about, right? Do I care if this goes down? Yes, then I should probably put a ring on it. No, sorry, I should probably put like a trace and a metric on it. And how is this exposed? And then what we would do, basically aggregate this in a very simple Jaeger and then visualize it. Now, the last lesson which I'm going to cover is, okay, so we've done all of these, it's been 4 years doing OpenTelemetry. And then one of the things I sort of realized, at least this is for me, and these spans and traces are just basically fancy logs. That's all they are. And sometimes they're not even that good. At least I think my perception is they are very complex, and there are a lot of labels that are inside. I understand why they were put there in the first place, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, can this be sort of changed a bit? And there are several articles, and all of them sort of tackle the problem from a different angle. But I think keeping sort of the conversation on how to, on logs, I think it's easier for you, for people to understand what problem you're trying to solve. So saying, sort of focusing on, okay, these are logs, but we just find ways to group them together. I think that's the easier way to just go and say, okay, let's go and do a tracing. So for me, lesson learned here were basically, okay, OpenTelemetry has got very complicated way to dispatch spans. I understand why it's there, but as a person who wants to try and play with the protocol, it's very hard. And experimenting with event schema has been hard as well. That's, I think, why we have a monoculture on OpenTelemetry SDKs, because it's not easy to hack on any of them. It's actually a pain. So, recap. As a dev, OpenTelemetry is great. It is great, but all of the products out there which are collecting and using this data, they tend to have like some sort of extra complexity or sort of interpret the data in different ways, which I think is a strength and a weakness. And of course, they have got different opinions, which is basically driving you to do things in different way. And the other things which I learned is that you should try and experiment, because just adopting what, the auto-instrumentation is going to get you so far. But if you actually try and change things, then you might realize that actually they're not far off what you're already using or logging, but there are some really neat ideas which are going to take you to the next level. And that's all of it.
It was amazing. I have plenty of questions. I have plenty of questions. I love it. I enjoy it.
I know you're biased, so I'm sure I'm really not looking forward to the questions.
We have OTEL end user SIG. You have to go there. You have to talk about the story. I love it. I will keep my questions for later. But thank you. That was awesome. That was really cool. So for all the one that was watching, drop us a comment what you thought about Daniel. I think it was fantastic. But all right, so thanks, Daniel, and let's move on to the next sessions with Lise. I mean, Lise will transition to another topic related. Okay, with the probably observability, OpenTelemetry will probably be on the picture. But let's jump to Lise's talk. Hey, Liz.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'm really excited to have you here. So I'm dropping the link. So Lise has written a book, by the way, Observability Engineering. So talk is going to be about Observability 2.0. So if you want to learn more and go deeper on the observability topic, check out the QR code. I will drop it later on after the talk. So Lise, where are you based? Because it's an APAC talk edition, but you're not in APAC today.
No, I'm in Vancouver right now. So I split my time between Vancouver and Sydney. So I'm in the process of scooting back and forth. So it works out because I'm up pretty late sometimes when I'm in Vancouver.
So you are in the past, while Daniel was in the future, and I'm almost in the middle. So I'm in the present. I will tell that I'm in the present. So to confirm, for my perspective.
Everything is relative.
Just about relative. Yeah, that's true. All right, so I'll leave you 15 minutes, and I'll see you in. Good luck for your presentation, and see you in a bit.
That sounds good. Hey, everyone. So thanks for joining. So I wanted to share some of the things that we have been learning about how people are approaching their observability journeys, what's motivating them, and what's working or not working in the field. So I think overall we have to contextualize that observability exists not in a vacuum, right? Like observability is helping us achieve things that we want to achieve. So in general, we want to have faster delivery cycles, and faster delivery cycles mean that we have to ensure developers are not afraid of on-call, right? That developers are on-call for their services, that we're doing observability-driven development where we're looking at the telemetry signals, we're testing in production, we're using feature flagging, we're using CI/CD, and we're managing SLOs. But to me personally, I think the SLOs are kind of that motivating factor for observability, because it means that you kind of need this capability to start from my system is broken and figure out what's going on. And that's overall kind of why I think it makes sense to talk about observability, and why it makes sense to talk about the previous generations of observability and kind of what we're trying to term observability 2.0, kind of in a contrast from what we were saying before of, oh, no, that's not observability, that's monitoring. You know what? Actually, we've been doing observability the whole time in order to tighten the feedback loops at the heart of our systems. So originally, people were like, hey, there's controllability, right? Like, there are complex systems that can be modeled mathematically, and observability is how you can measure the internal states of the system based off of the external outputs, right? Fine, it belongs in a textbook, not so useful for us to apply as software developers in practice. I think it makes much better sense to talk about it as a spectrum, for us to say, you know what, it's a property of complex systems, similar to testability, similar to usability, reliability, availability, right? Like, it's something that you don't necessarily like slap on and you're done. Instead, it's something that we kind of have to iterate on and improve on over time. And therefore, it makes sense to say, okay, we've been always doing observability, but there are some things that might be more effective in today's world than in the past. So if observability is a property of complex systems, why is there such a large difference between the outcomes that we see from teams that are doing this really well and teams that are really, really struggling? And why is it that we are kind of, why did we need to originally say several years ago, observability is not monitoring? So I think this is where the kind of syntax of talking about, major versions makes sense, right? Like, it is a large, potentially breaking change to move from the older world to the newer world. And it's something that provides you with large benefits, but you have to kind of be committed to going on that journey. So when we move from, taking the previous approaches that we'd cobbled together, right? Like, we'd started off with keeping system metrics, keeping things with, Zabbix and like syslog and like, and then maybe throwing on some Jaeger traces, right? Like, yeah, right. Like, it kind of worked because we were kind of incrementally building things. But what if we took a radically different approach to use a single source of truth and use wide structured logs? So that's, I think, kind of the philosophy behind thinking about the modern approaches to observability, is trying to correlate our data together. So making sure that we have high dimensionality and high cardinality baked into our data models right off of the bat, rather than saying, if you use traces, you can use high cardinality, but if you use metrics, oh no, we're going to slap you on the wrist because, how dare you blow out our cardinality budget, right? Like, suddenly your metrics vendor bill is 10 times or 100 times what you expect it to be, right? Like, developers have been afraid of production. They've been afraid of breaking it because it's so brittle, both in terms of what happens if they cannot debug it, as well as what happens if they are trying to do the right thing and instrument their code, and it's not turning out the way that they expected, and they wind up paying too much money and not actually being able to find the answers. Similarly, I think the fundamental workflow change about the modern variants of observability is being able to do exploratory analysis, rather than have, I have a fixed dashboard and either the query that I want has been added to the dashboard or it hasn't, either there's a pre-aggregated time series or there isn't. Instead, the answer is you're always going to be able to find your answer. And it might take running 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or even 10 queries, but every time you take a step, you're kind of bisecting you're bisecting the problem space. You're ruling out and saying, it's not in this half of the haystack. Great, okay. So the problem must be somewhere in this component or in this set of components. Okay, we've narrowed it down to a component. Which user is impacted, or which potential subcomponent is involved, and so forth. Right, so it kind of shifts things more towards the scientific method, towards being able to debug, being able to understand like what's going on and how can we follow the breadcrumbs instead of having to rely on intuition or the most senior developer knowing it and the least senior developer having to guess at it. And as I was saying earlier about SLOs, right, like the reason that a lot of people have struggled with SLOs historically is that SLOs tell you when things are broken, they don't tell you why. And that is a big leap of faith for people to go to when you're used to kind of having a sea of alerts. And, sure, you might get noisy alerts all the time, but, anytime you get an alert, it's correlated to a specific machine, so you know to start debugging there. When you have SLOs, you're starting from kind of the top level of your system and saying, we're seeing symptoms of end user visible problems, but how do you know where it's coming from? So having modern observability that lets you find wherever the problem is, regardless of where you're starting, that's a huge advantage to being able to then integrate SLOs. I think one of the key things is that when you're storing the data only once, right, like that eliminates a lot of the cost of that duplication of trying to maintain medium or high cardinality metrics and having traces and having logs that are often duplicative of the trace data, right? Like instead, what if we could treat it all as one single data type that we could query all together? So that's what makes observability, the modern observability, right? Like the approaches that we find to result in more mature teams, that it is faster in terms of the amount of time it takes to query. It's cheaper in terms of the storage, and it's simpler for people who are not seasoned ops people to debug, right? Because at the end of the day, yes, you, a 20-year veteran of the software industry, you probably understand how to use logs. A new grad does not necessarily understand the ins and outs of, pick your logging tool of choice. So by making it more intuitive and kind of bringing a user experience mentality to improvement of the observability tooling, that's what I think yields great results for the newer generation of developers that are onboarding into our industry. So the way that people have historically been doing observability with separate logs and traces and metrics pillars, that's the hard way, right? Like that it's achieving, 80%, 90% of that same outcome, but you're requiring like 10 times as much work and 10 times as much cost. So it's a change to switch to kind of unified data stores and high cardinality built-in systems, but I think that it's well worth it. So how does this actually work in practice, right? Like, I'm waving my hands and saying, you can just replace all of your metrics, right? Like, and the way that you get there is you do post facto aggregation rather than pre-aggregation when things arrive into your system. So by making it possible to do the maths post facto, it means that you can do math and count up and say, what's the P95 of this endpoint, or what's the P95 of this user, or what's the P95 of this user on this endpoint, because you haven't pre-aggregated the data, so you're still able to produce the metrics, even for metrics that you didn't think to pre-aggregate. And when you have structured logs become searchable. So you can always visualize them in the same fashion as you could visualize logs. But in case you know which field you want to search for, it makes it a lot faster because you can only pull down the specific data correlated to that specific log dimension, which makes it a heck of a lot faster to use. So when we deduplicate traces and logs and we say we synthesize metrics out of the traces, that's kind of the mechanism for getting teams to a place where they can trust the data because it's consistent. The trace waterfall is just visualizing logs or structured logs over time. And all we're doing is we're shifting the burden onto the systems to be able to do it at read time. And I think that it is, I want to be fair to the previous generations of logs development, right? Like when we had logs that we were creating 20 years ago, we didn't have the infrastructure to mass scan them and process them at read time. We had to do pre-processing at write time. Same for metrics, right? Like metrics are kind of the shortcut of we've just exploded into the cloud world. We need to make dramatic simplifications in order to be able to process the data at scale. But I think with compute getting very, very cheap, suddenly we've managed to be able to turn the corner on cost and performance and be able to do this processing fast enough so that you don't have to pay that pre-computation tax. So how does this change developer workflows, right? I think the way that modern observability changes developer workflows is that instead of looking only when you get paged, it becomes natural to look at your changes as they're going out to production. For instance, at Honeycomb, yes, we work on an observability tool, but like we do dog food. And one of the ways that we dog food is when someone is working on a pull request, there's a section in the pull request template that says, what's your observability plan? Paste a link to a graph that is going to change when your pull request merges, right? That way you're looking at it right after it goes out. And that way you're able to see and kind of continuously validate rather than only when something goes wrong. And when we do this, this also means that we're kind of spreading the knowledge out across the team because people are leaving breadcrumbs as to, how did you test that feature? Well, here's the chart link. Or, how did this more senior developer debug this the last time? Instead of having to growl around in that developer's home directory to look for their shell scripts, you can find it in their query history, or in the worst case, you can as a more junior developer, still figure out the tooling well enough to figure out like what's going on and be able to reliably debug novel issues, even if you've never seen that issue happen to you personally before. So by kind of merging the worlds of development and production, which I think Daniele did a great job of describing, right? Like when you start interacting with your telemetry data, it creates this feedback loop and conversation with your code, which makes it a lot easier to work with production and be less afraid of production. And by the way, Daniele, thank you for sharing that screenshot of Charlie saying unstructured logs are garbage. I will caveat that and say unstructured logs are a starting point. We've kind of softened our messaging there. But we think that in order to get the most value out, you have to apply rules to kind of take your unstructured data and structure it. And that's kind of how you're able to migrate from the 1.0 to 2.0 world. And when you're doing this, right, like it means you don't have to worry quite as much about cost or blowing out cardinality dimensions. You don't have to necessarily think about, the ops people have one metric that's, number of pages per quarter. And, we have our own development metrics around development cycle, right? Instead, it's kind of how healthy is our team? Well, how quickly are we shipping? What percentage of our changes are staying in production? These are the things that are, known in our industry as the DORA metrics, right? The DevOps research group metrics that say, time to deploy changes, break fix, percentage of changes that are broken and need to be forcibly rolled back, right? Like those are the kinds of things that we're able to optimize for, and observability plays a large part in. So when we're doing this iterative debugging cycle, it's building a muscle, right? Like it's really training yourself to be able to iterate and kind of resolve the problems face down rather than, either I know it or I don't. And another really, really cool thing is when you start thinking about everything as a wide event, suddenly it means that, even things that you thought of as traditional system-based metrics, you can just append them to your events. You can just say, hey, by the way, when I'm sending off a trace span, why don't I just attach the amount of system memory in use, right? Like I don't have to send it separately. I can just send it along with all of my data. And that way I have a correlation, right? Like if I see that a bunch of requests are consistently failing, and I see that the memory is elevated in all of them, that gives me a pretty good idea that I'm probably, I have a memory leak, or I have something that's blowing out the memory when the system goes bad. There is something that is relevant to mention, which is people have been historically hesitant to embrace the Observability 2.0 vision because of concerns over sampling, because people were originally using kind of head-based sampling, kind of dumb sampling that was saying, we're just going to keep 1 in 100 traces or whatever, brute force. But there's actually a cool way to do this, which keeps the most significant traces by doing tail sampling, by saying, I'm going to devote maybe 50 or 60% of my total number of traces to establishing a good baseline, but I'm going to over-index and store, 40% of my traces are going to be in anomalies, errors, slowest 1% of requests, and so forth. So this is how we get to a world of being able to more easily understand what's happening in our systems, asking questions from the outside, leveraging a single data store that's usable by our developers, and be able to ask and answer new questions without shipping code. So this is how we build better software. It's not through trial and error. It's not through guesswork. Instead, it's through being able to methodically follow the trail of breadcrumbs and be able to leverage the knowledge of our teammates. So we're not going to get to the next generation of systems just by having people be burnt out and following orders and following waterfall development. We really need people to be empowered to investigate their production systems and feel like they can own their systems and understand what's happening in production. So modern observability really helps people engage in software engineering as an engineering discipline rather than just hacking software into the world. So we've got a heap of things to do. Hopefully this gives you a perspective as to the kind of past, present, and future of observability and how it might play with your other engineering productivity efforts. So with that, yeah, please do check out the book. If you could bring the link up on screen. And we're actually right now working on the second edition. So hopefully that we'll have some chapters in early access in the next couple of weeks in early March.
Thank you, Liz. I have a few questions. I am pretty aligned with what you presented, but I have questions because there's something that you brought up, and I thought, I will keep it for later.
Panel discussion
for the panel discussion. But thanks a lot, and let's move on to the last speaker of today's session, which is Stephen. So, Stephen. Hey, Stephen, how are you?
Oh, I'm good. I've just, while Liz was speaking, I was just watching my dog hump his teddy bear, which is a bit disturbing. It's very distracting.
So I mean, okay. So so you're saying you were not completely listening everything.
No, it was a little bit of distraction. I missed a word or two along the way. Yeah.
Okay. So still in Auckland.
Yes, still here at Auckland, New Zealand.
So what is the time, by the way? You're now in Auckland.
7:41 p.m.
7. Oh, yeah. Actually,
on Thursday.
We are actually 12 hours exactly difference. So it's 7:41 in my time. And okay, so you are in almost at the beer time, while I'm still in coffee time.
Yeah, that's the way it should be.
All right. So Stephen was used to be is still you never quit that role. So you're still a performance engineer in your heart, I guess. But you move on to more SRE tasks and managing, and that's why you come up with this beautiful podcast. So if people who never heard about Steven's podcasts, there's always nice visuals made by Microsoft MS Paint on Windows 3.1, but very, very nice, always good topics. So I recommend to take time and listen to that. It's really good content. I will bring the QR code after the talk, but I'll leave you on stage for 50 minutes. And
Fantastic.
And so good luck for your presentation.
Cool. See you afterwards. Okay, here we go. Hi there. My name's Stephen, as Henrik mentioned. I am currently a technology manager based in Auckland, in New Zealand, as we said, where I currently work for IAG, which is Australasia's largest general insurer. So I come from quite a different world, from the world of enterprise. And I've been working in technology for coming up 17 years. Most of that time, as Henrik said, I worked as a performance engineer before entering the world of SRE in 2021, working for a year after that as a developer advocate, which is a lot of fun. And now I manage a team of reliability engineers, environment and release managers, and testers. And as Henrik said, I host a podcast called Slight Reliability, which is about SRE and observability and the humans who work in that space. And I also blog about engineering leadership and management, which I'm still pretty new to. Today, I'm going to be talking about some of the challenges in achieving observability when you have complicated SaaS products, or software as a service, involved in your ecosystem. Modern enterprises run off complex and diverse technology ecosystems. Everything from mainframes, monolithic 3-tier apps, microservices, a mix of data center, public cloud, hybrid cloud, combinations of technologies which weren't necessarily built to be used together, but which we find ways to integrate together using metaphorical sticky tape and glue. And something that I think sets enterprises apart from startups or big tech is that at the heart of many of these businesses are these hypercritical monolithic applications. These are often systems of record. They hold the most important data, they execute the most important business logic, and the business cannot operate without these systems. Sometimes they're built in-house, but more often than not, they are commercial, off-the-shelf products obtained from a vendor, which are then adapted to meet the needs of the business. Achieving observability in this enterprise context is a unique challenge. There's a lot of moving parts, totally different technologies being used for infrastructure and apps. Often different systems are owned by different teams. They may even sit in different divisions of the company. And if left alone to organically emerge, the way that we monitor these systems will end up being as diverse as the systems themselves. Some apps or services won't have any monitoring at all. Some will have logging but no monitoring or tracing. We end up with inconsistent coverage and maturity in our ability to track system and service health. But the biggest gap in the situation is that we have no ability whatsoever to understand how the ecosystem behaves end to end. When a customer clicks a button, what happens? What is the chain of requests that spans out across the ecosystem? Which components are touched? How long does each span take? Where are the errors occurring? This hinders our ability to investigate and diagnose issues, And it only gets more difficult the more complex our technology ecosystem becomes, which of course it continually does. When observability is inconsistent, enterprises often standardize around a single observability platform or tool. One tool to rule them all. So here we have agents or SDKs running on all of our different systems and services, which collect and emit telemetry to a single product. This becomes our single source of truth for the state of our services and systems, and we build habits and processes and dependencies around it. With the right tooling and configuration in place, you can put together the holy grail of modern observability, end-to-end distributed tracing. It isn't always easy. It depends on whether your observability platform of choice is compatible with your different technologies. I've seen this level of observability in a really complex enterprise, and it's amazing and it's powerful. I have a colleague who wrote an automated tool which would grab the associated distributed traces whenever a service level was breached, and it would send it to whoever was on call. The time and mental energy that saved when investigating an incident was off the charts. But there's something that has shifted in the industry which has introduced a new challenge to our goal of implementing end-to-end observability. So vendors have traditionally provided off-the-shelf products to customers, and customers then self-host those apps in a data center or in the public cloud. The shift is that vendors who have traditionally sold these off-the-shelf products are moving them into the cloud as a new kind of software as a service. In effect, it's the same monolithic applications that we know and love, but now the vendor hosts the infrastructure and the customer moves to some kind of pay-by-consumption model. There's arguments to be made about whether this fits the definition of SaaS, especially if the vendor provides customers their own tenant rather than a multi-tenant service. But nonetheless, there's a fundamental change in who is accountable for the infrastructure and how much visibility and control the customer has of that infrastructure and the application. This isn't SaaS, just to be clear, this isn't SaaS as we've known it before. It's not just a service that we call. Sometimes this SaaS can call other systems and services within our enterprise. It can end up being in the middle of a complex chain of requests as part of which are integral as an integral part of our enterprise architecture. The enterprise observability we achieved before in my previous slide was because we had the autonomy to install observability agents on all of our different systems and apps. With this new complex SaaS model, we don't have that option. We don't have permission to access or go and install agents or even import libraries. The vendor is now in control of the observability tooling, approach, and coverage for this integral part of the enterprise. I've seen an example of one of these new SaaS solutions where a third-party observability tool was bundled with the application. Customers don't have a choice. This is the only way they can access logs, metrics, or traces. Unfortunately, this third-party tool was different from the strategic observability platform used for every other application in the organization. And as a result, the ability to capture end-to-end traces was broken. And there's also now two different tools that engineers need to learn how to use. And we have the swivel chair situation, where when you're investigating an incident, you have to flip between two different tools. Now, I want to make a special mention of OpenTelemetry, which has been mentioned today already at this point, because you might think, hey, that's the answer to this problem. This is the silver bullet, but I just don't think it's that simple. Now, I see the OpenTelemetry collector as the perfect way to decouple how we capture our telemetry from where we use it to gain insight. It can pull together data from a number of different tools and protocols, translate it to OTEL, send it to whatever strategic tool you want. I've seen a fantastic talk, I think it was one of the previous OliFests or SLO comps about that, and how the collector was used as a first step in replacing commercial tools by doing that initial decoupling. However, again, with this new kind of software as a service application, we can't necessarily get our telemetry out of the SaaS ecosystem to send to an OTEL collector. That's only possible if the SaaS vendor deliberately builds that functionality into their product. I've seen another example where it was possible to emit telemetry from that third-party observability tool that's bundled with the SaaS product. However, now we're paying twice to ingest and store our telemetry in two different tools, which for a big enterprise can easily be 6 or 7 figures or more, providing no benefit whatsoever. And that's just not efficient. So the situation I'm describing is something I've been challenged with in my work. It's a confounding situation because of how much is outside of my or even my organization's control. We have, however, tried to make the best of the situation and thought about how we can work within these restrictions. So keeping in mind the goal here is to ensure that we know when our services are down and to be able to simply and quickly triage and investigate issues, and to do this cost effectively if possible. The first thing that becomes extremely important is your relationship with your SaaS vendor. I didn't expect that to be such a big part of my job, but that's a huge part of what I do now. Relationships with complex SaaS vendors is much more active than when you purchase a simpler service. Build ceremonies and forums to meet with technical and sales and leadership reps from the vendor. Express concerns, get support, or even ask to get the features that you want in their product backlog, especially if you're a big customer, such as the ability to emit OpenTelemetry data so that you can ingest it into your own strategic observability platform. Secondly, if you are cornered into using a new third-party tool that no one knows how to use, make sure that you invest the time getting people upskilled in that tool. I know that's a very simple thing to say, but just something that we've learned. Thirdly, if you have limited white box monitoring, then fall back on black box. So what I mean is synthetic transactions can be a great way to track service health, to at least proactively tell you about incidents that need your attention. The beauty of synthetics is that you can run them in your strategic observability platform without completely independently of your SaaS product. But the drawback, of course, is that they provide a really limited sample size of data points, and they don't really help you investigate an issue once it's been identified. Fourth, it can help to triage incidents by looking at other kinds of signals. The simple act of tracking all deployments to both non-prod and production environments made by any team to any system, and then providing a clear, visible timeline of that across the org can go a long way to correlating which change is correlated with each bug or incident. And lastly, prepare for the day when you'll be able to get OpenTelemetry data out of your SaaS product. Look into the concept of a telemetry gateway, the OpenTelemetry collector, or other wrapper services that you can put around that. So as you can see, there's clearly some limits to what we can do in the situation I've described, which leads me to my last question. What could these complex SaaS vendors do to make their customers' lives easier in this admittedly unique context? I think firstly, and most importantly, I would ask that SaaS vendors don't use third-party commercial observability tools to capture telemetry that's intended for your customers. Recognize that your customers already have their own observability platforms and processes. Provide ways for them to emit telemetry from your platform into their existing tooling. Use OpenTelemetry. That's what it's designed for. Build in the functionality to emit that OpenTelemetry data. Third-party observability products introduce a myriad of technical, cost, and even legal complexities, which can hurt your customers. Secondly, natively support context propagation to make sure distributed tracing is possible. Customers will want to trace requests that pass through your system and out the other side. And lastly, include observability costs in pricing discussions with your customers upfront. Now, I didn't really talk much about the cost factor in this talk, but it's a big topic in its own right with a separate conversation. Enterprises have tight budgets and financial projections need to be really accurate. So the more confidence that you can give your customers that their observability bills aren't going to explode, the less stress they're going to feel. Okay, I don't think the situation I've described today is necessarily very common yet. But as vendors lift and shift their apps into the cloud, it's going to become something that we face more frequently. So if you take anything away from my talk today, it's this. There's a new kind of complex software as a service in the market, which makes achieving end-to-end observability extraordinarily difficult. When SaaS vendors partner with third-party commercial observability tools, it can become very complex and costly. And in an ideal world, SaaS vendors like this would allow the emitting of telemetry natively so that their customers can consume that in whatever observability tooling they already have. If you work in tech, I'd love to connect with you. I'm mostly active on LinkedIn. I've been dabbling in Blue Sky recently, so if you're into dogs, D&D, or Survivor, whatever else I'm up to, you can find me there. Or you can find my podcast like Reliability. I think there's going to be a QR code again coming up just by searching for it on most podcast apps or on the YouTube link here. You may have also noticed, as Hendrik's mentioned, my unique MS Paint style artwork. I post that on my Instagram account. And it's not really shown here because I don't have a lot of content yet, but I do blog a little bit about leadership and management and the tech space on Medium. And my username is @Townshend, and my blog's called Bleeding Tech. Lastly, thanks, Hendrik, for the opportunity to talk. It's been a little while since I've presented, so it's good to get back on the horse.
Awesome. So I didn't know that you started to do some blog posts about engineering, by the way. So good to know. So those are you said available on Medium.
Yes, Medium. It's called Bleeding Tech. I've only got 3 blogs, but yeah, I'm spending a lot of time these days thinking about what is a good technology leader and manager. What does that mean, and how do I do a good job with this?
Okay. If you're able to manage yourself with this that's it. Good. All right. So thanks. Let's move on to the last piece where we can finally ask questions. Woo, that's awesome. All right. So see you in a bit for the panel discussion. Hey, finally we head up to the panel discussion. So it's the right moment for all of you who has been listening so far to the three different sessions. You can drop your questions. I've noted down 3 questions, by the way, and also Dan, Lee, Stephen, if you noted questions to each of you, it's the right moment to ask. One thing, if you've been joining us late, don't worry. All the live stream are obviously available afterwards, so you can still watch it on LinkedIn. YouTube, of course, the recording is available, and I will add timestamps later on so that you can jump directly to the right talk or the right session that you are interested in. And also, it's also broadcast to Twitch, so you can still watch the live stream on Twitch, I think. But never mind. All right, so let's start the panel discussion, starting with Dan. So, Dan, first of all, it was a funny talk. I really like it.
Thank you.
The fact that how you share the story. So you mentioned that you were using, so you first using this auto-instrumentation that comes up with a lot of packages, but yeah, probably you've seen that you can turn off a few of those libraries. You don't have to use everything by default. Have you tried to disable things so just to get the minimal instrumentation, the only needed ones, or maybe you didn't have know about this information?
So when we started with this, we didn't have. So OpenTelemetry was just 0.26, so it was a long time ago, and we didn't have as many packages. I think 46 is what the current number. And of course, the first step was to actually just add one by one. But I think even just adding one by one, I mean, it's okay, but it comes with some opinions about what should happen when something goes wrong, which doesn't necessarily mean that matches your expectation or the team's expectation. I think, and then the other things, I think there are basically 2 parts, I guess. One is the auto-instrumentation, and the way it's implemented is basically just going down and monkey patching in Node.js. Whereas there is a push I don't know how to say this, but there is some interest in the Node.js community to expose this data with other channels. So other way to expose this data without going down and changing how the system works. So I think it's a little bit, I would say OpenTelemetry, at least in Node.js, is not, there is some tension. There is some tension because we are not used to certain things. And then the way they are implemented, I think they are probably looking at Java or other languages, and they're just copying these ideas and implementing. And there are like things that don't work the same way, and so you can tell the things are not perfectly fine. I mean, it works. It works really well. I don't want to bash on OpenTelemetry and say this is not working. It is working. It is good. It's just it's very unusual in the way it's implemented.
Sure. I mean, Understand completely. And then you said that you were using first Jaeger, and you're using their adaptive sampler, which because I never had the chance to try it out. Because I think the adaptive sampling, it was something that was very exciting when I looked at Jaeger, but I never had the chance to deeply use it. So now you said that you build your own storage. So how do you deal with sampling? So you just say, oh, you mentioned just throw what it is needed. So you use tail sampling with a collector, because at the end it's very hard to say, oh, I'm going to put 10%, but then you don't know what 10% you're picking up. You see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, this is my takeaway. I'm going to prefix it. I'm going to say that this because I think it's important that I think the way I see OpenTelemetry is that, and observability in general, is that I feel like we're just at the beginning. So a lot of the opinions that your community sharing, I'm sharing, is just the very beginning. So we started forming sort of ideas on what is good and what is not, but still very early days. And then for me, it was like I was looking at OpenTelemetry, Jaeger, and sampling, and I was like, okay, we don't have a lot of data, and if I start sampling this data, yes, of course, I'm going to have less problems to look for, but at the same time, what if I really need something, right? What if that is missing? Then I need to wait for the next error to come to actually fix that. And for the scale that we work with, that was like, okay, should I take the chance, or should I just ingest the data? Okay, I ingest all of the data. It's too much data, but the question that comes after that, and I think this is, from what I hear from my community, is you should log what you really care about. You should think about the end result rather than just dumping everything and hoping for the best. And I think this is basically where we pushed, we push a lot. It was like, what do I need to know for my service to work, right? How do I know if things are working? And then from there, we backtrack and figure out what we need. And that is driving us like, okay, we still ingest maybe 3 gigabytes a day. It's a third. But those logs are actually useful, and I want 100% of them, because if something goes wrong, I really know.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas if I do sampling, it's like, okay, it's like giving a chance. Okay, there is a very, very small chance that I'm going to miss something, but there's still a chance. So I think for me, that was like, okay, maybe for the scale we work at, not useful.
And I saw that you were using the logs, and now because you use SQLite, so you store mainly the traces. Do you also store traces and logs in your own Observability backend?
So basically, what we do. So this is going to sound super weird, but basically, originally we tried to develop a backend for Jaeger, and that didn't work out. And the reason why we want the backend for Jaeger is because we could go and query Jaeger. We didn't want to have Jaeger and Elasticsearch and Prometheus, and the stack becomes massive. So we said, well, what if we just install something like simple? We just store all the data in a SQLite database and we just query. It's going to be like a gigabyte, like 5 gigabyte SQLite query database. How it's pretty small.
I've been really impressed by the work of the Australian team, SEQ.
Okay.
They kind of do that kind of all-in-one small-scale database design.
Yeah, and that actually worked out. So for us, it was basically we just built a small microservice and we just pushed everything to it. The only things that we found really, really hard, and I don't know, I understand that there is a committee for choosing these things, but the schema for OpenTelemetry and for shipping the data is basically like a proto file, which I guess is coming from Google Land or somewhere decided what it was. And it's very hard for anyone to generate at least it was hard for us to understand how it works, generate the interfaces, generate the code, which is going to be plugged in, and then build our own, OpenTelemetry collector, storage or whatever. And what I found, and this is, again, my experience, is that because of that, I think now we have a single SDK, right? There is no one innovating on that space because I think it's too hard to get going. So if you look at any of the packages on NPM, which have to do with OpenTelemetry, even if they don't say it, under the hood, they use the OTEL collector. And so there is none of them which is actually re-implementing the protocol, whatever protocol there is. Which is, I think it's, at least for JavaScript, is not driving any sort of innovation on how we do that. how we collect metrics, how we ship metrics. We have to rely on whatever is coming from OTEL, which is good.
But you never went to the route of saying I want to build my custom spans or my custom or my
we always build custom spans. We all track metrics manually. I think Liz and Stephen mentioned that you want to propagate context. I think there are languages that makes it very easy to propagate context, but in JavaScript, propagating context is just very, very difficult. And we'd rather not do it in the way that other languages do it. But that's basically how it is imposed to us by the SDK. Again, I think this is a strong opinion, so I wouldn't, I would take it with a pinch of salt.
I mean, I think your experience that you're sharing. It's true that when you start, you have the first signals coming in, you're very excited, and then you start covering other type of focus because then you have other problems to cover. So I think that may reflect other experience. So I think it makes sense to share your experience, and it's really useful to get that type of feedback for sure. Liz, do you have any questions for Dan?
I think mainly my question is, how big is the team? How many people did you have to onboard into doing this? 2. Okay. Yeah, I think it's definitely a very different situation depending upon whether you're a team of 1 or 2 people and whether you're a large enterprise. But yeah, it's I think the main thing that I wanted to ask about was Henrik already asked it about kind of the defaults around and disabling Redis auto instrumentation, disabling the file auto instrumentation.
Yeah, I think that's in the end we basically just disable all of it and track manually everything, and to the point where we wrapped all the libraries so we can pass the span into it, which is like. In your presentation, you say, very, very expensive. You embrace everything, but that's what we did. We just embrace all of it, but the benefit we get is just the kind of tracing that we have are very detailed, and we can easily drill down and figure out what is the problem. So I think massive investment for sure. I don't think most companies can do that, but the benefit on the other side are just. Phenomenal.
Right, exactly. You're front loading the investments that then you spend less time debugging in the future.
A lot. It's I don't know. It's very hard to describe, but I'm just going to say it's amazing, but it doesn't actually describe how amazing it is.
I know that's a really challenging thing, right? Like, how do you get that light bulb moment of you've seen it on your own data and now you can't live any other way, right? Like
it's very hard to. But I've got, if you don't mind, Liz, I've got a question because it covers also your presentation as well.
Yeah.
So I've seen some of the recent articles and presentation as well, which are pushing for wide events, right?
Yeah.
And I think wide events are very interesting, right? Because at least for me, it's like wide events, fancy name, you put everything in there, okay. But if I look under the hood, right? If I just take a step back and look at it, it just looks like a structured log.
It's a log.
It's a log. It's a structured log. They're synonyms. It's
a single snapshot, a single event. Right, but at this, and then I take a step back and I look at all the pain I've gone through shipping manually these logs with OpenTelemetry protocol, right, where a span needs to have a start and an end, right, and then I compare that with wide events, and a wide event is just a snapshot, just like, and I'm wondering why do we need to do that? Why do we need the span with start and end when we could just ship? Not always wide. I understand wide events are expensive. We don't want to ship them all the time, right? But a span could be just like grouping of wide events. So I don't need a start and an end. I just need the event.
People often tend to ask, like, where did my time go, right? People also have the temptation to record, right? Like, as soon as you turn on the option for people to make like many little events, then suddenly you're back to the world of unstructured logs. You're back to the world of people, for a single transaction, people are dumping 100 different log lines, right? Like that's kind of the danger. So it's basically a forcing function to say, I want to roll up everything that happened inside of this event handler, right? Or I want to roll up everything that happened inside of this client call into one span. But definitely, a hack for sure, right? Like is if you want to send a span with, a duration of 0, just stop it and, say, fake it and say that it immediately ended. You can do that. But yeah, I think overall, it's kind of this SDK and ergonomics question of if you already have the data as to when it stopped and ended, I think that's a span. But if you're trying to ingest a log file that's been generated, right? Like if you're trying in that world of trying to adapt from I have, logs or events, there's no reason you have to go all the way to tracing right away, right? You can take your data and kind of munge it and work with it. And, yes, you'll get the events in a chronological order per request ID. Right, which then kind of obscures some of that parent-child relationship as well, right? Like that's the other thing you lose if you don't have spans and you just have wide events, is you lose the ability to say this was caused, A was caused because of B, which was caused because of C.
But don't you track those in the wide events? I mean, again, keep in mind that I'm a newbie, but don't you track all of these data anyway? It's just like I track the span ID, the parent span ID, and trace ID, even the wide event.
Not everyone does, right? Like a lot of people who are coming from the traditional logs world start their journey by saying, I'm going to propagate just the top level request ID all the way through. And then they look at it in terms of which server did this pass through and which request ID was it, and here's the body. Okay. And then after that, they're enriching, right? They don't necessarily have the infrastructure to pass the parent ID as well.
Yeah, and sometimes it's dependent on if the logs are related to a transaction. So then you want to attach it to your transaction, but sometimes logs could be somewhere else, and then you just want to emit it and use the semantic conventions to then index or collate later on the logs sent.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I've been saying, it's a spectrum, right? Like it's not necessarily you're doing monitoring or you're doing logging or you're doing observability, right? Like it's how well integrated are things, right? Like how well structured are they? Yeah. How what insights can you infer?
Okay, understood. Thank you for that.
But I think Daniele, you're a more advanced user, right? Like you built your own for this, right? Like you had to wrap your head around it. I think a majority of people are just expecting to turn on the auto-instrumentation and have it go. And sometimes we let them down with being overly verbose, but people also will be angry at us if we miss something. So,
but at the same time, I think it has. The reason why I ask is also because it has implication on how you store and query the data afterwards, right? If you have just snapshots and pointing times, it's different from having like a span which can have a duration. So the kind of query that you do are also different. So my aspiration in these sort of subjects is that I find it easier to have just point in time than having tracing. Said that, everything I do is basically spanning traces now. But going to wide events actually makes the backend easier and ingesting the data easier and also lightweight as well. I don't need as much data as I have in the same request that I do to store it. I don't know. That's just what I noticed.
Yeah, but I think it depends also on the use case, because I think there are people who wants to track the transaction and everything and then have the duration. So it really depends on the actual use case, I think.
Okay, cool.
Stephen, I had a reaction to something that you said.
Cool.
My reaction is you're saying, this is a new problem that people are starting to have with, needing their vendors to emit data in OpenTelemetry format. I think one of my biggest pet peeves is Amazon does not emit enough data in OpenTelemetry format. Like Amazon is one of those vendors that's kind of obligatory, and they make everything go through CloudWatch, which is this second party or third party system.
Well,
so I feel like I feel like your presentation should resonate with a wide variety of people, not just people who are adopting vendors who have their own observability solution. I think Amazon is one of those vendors for a lot of people.
Yeah. I did have a question going back to your talk, Dan, and maybe this might be a question for you, Liz, I'm not sure. So you're talking about the aggregation and being scared that you might miss that thing, which is really important. A couple of years ago, I haven't looked at OTEL really in great detail for a year and a bit, and at that time, you weren't able to do smart aggregation based on, say, I want to make sure every failure or error based on how I specify that is stored, and then I'll just do a subset of the ones that succeed. Can you do that with the free OpenTelemetry out of the box, or do you need commercial tools to support that sort of advanced stuff?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know. I think the way OpenTelemetry, the way the sampling work, I think it changed in between as well. So when I started, we had the different way to sampling in Jaeger. We didn't have OpenTelemetry collector when there was that Jaeger either. I mean, it was very early days, so it might be that now you can. And I've seen Cloudflare has got a very interesting ways to do this sampling as well. So I think there are, the community is coming up with new ideas. But I think for me, it was like, at that point in time, it was like, okay, I can reduce the number. And by reducing that number, now I don't have that problem anymore.
Yep.
So which is solving it for me.
Yeah. The only thing is when you use trace ID ratio is that there's no actual flag holding the actual ratio that has been applied in one given component. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
there's some SIG work going on there.
Yeah.
I've been following that closely, right? So yes, you can do the sampling in the collector now based off of individual properties. But the main drawback, right? Like there are two main drawbacks of collector-based sampling. Number one is the sample rate not being passed as an attribute. The second one is that it does not scale horizontally. That you kind of have to stand up a very, very large OTEL collector in order to handle a large throughput, right?
Even if you use the load balancer exporter, because the load balancer exporter should load balance your trace IDs on each individual collector, so then we could basically sample that. Do you think it would be at least would that resolve that?
Yes, I think that does partially. You still have the dynamic control issues then, right? Like how do you make sure that you are coordinating among the collectors to get an even ratio? Let's say you wanted to maintain 10% of your traffic is errors, 90% is successes, and then you get a big spike of errors, right? Like, so a dynamic sample rate adjustment requires some degree of peer-to-peer gossip. So I think the open source ecosystem is evolving and maturing and improving, and also it is in the interest of vendors, including my employer, to kind of make that path easier for customers with doing custom proprietary magic.
I think it's pushing the sampling, because sampling used to be a topic controlled by monitoring solutions or APM solution, whatever you name it. And now OpenTelemetry has the luxury, but then you're giving back that sampling question topic, which is a complicated topic in the hands of a user, and that could be very difficult to manage. I think that's my perceptions. Any other questions to Dan or no? Okay, so Lise, ask some questions. You mentioned something that I really like. You said that you should basically send the telemetry, and then from the telemetry data produced, you will generate metrics and stats and everything. And
Yep.
that's completely aligned with the OpenTelemetry culture, I would say, where you start with trace, you can attach a log to it, and then from there you can generate stats. And then you mentioned if you want to have a metric from your giving service, why don't you send it as pen events? I think that was a really, I really like that suggestions. I think it's a great idea. And then I thought, for example, if I have a third-party solution, I still want to have those metrics. So then those metrics is not in that process where I have a transaction with a log, with a metric produced. So it's going to be outside of it. So then would that not be in the Observability 2.0? How do you manage external data that you want to have? Because I don't know, it's your router or it's your proxy, it's your whatever. And
so things that are on the same node are pretty straightforward in order to right, like you can just use a span processor and just attach the additional attributes that you've scraped locally and kind of do that merge on the node itself. I think for anything that's genuinely third party, right? For example, the classic one is I'm grateful to Amazon for doing this, right? Like Amazon has made it possible to export CloudWatch metrics in OTLP metrics format, right? So you can then say, send your OTLP metrics to your observability vendor, send your tracing data to your observability vendor, and do the merge on the observability vendor side, right? But there it's not necessarily, you don't know which trace goes with which, database. You might then need to display those two graphs side by side rather than have them be annotated on the trace spans. So that's kind of the trade-off. Okay. Is anything that's local that's flowing through the same collector anyway, just append the metrics from the collector. Anything that's further afield, related to a remote RPC call, that's probably not going to be something that's as easy to annotate.
Okay, cool. Dan, you have a constraint, I think.
Yes, I need to go. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan, for spending the time with us. And I hope to see you in KubeCon London, by the way.
Yeah, we'll be there. I'll see you there.
All right.
Good to meet you, Dan.
Thank you. Bye.
Steven, I'm looking at the time because it's already 1 hour and 20 minutes. Time goes very fast. Steven, do you have any questions for Liz?
Just really a comment. So I agree with everything you're saying, basically. And I think it's probably one of the reasons I got onto leadership is that one of the challenges, it makes so much sense to me, but if you're in an organization where the leadership isn't necessarily coming from an engineering first background, we're not like building tech products first, it's hard to convince of these things, right? And it's one of the reasons I got into leadership is I want to be able to influence to make these things because I can see how much better the world could be if we did that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the ways that you approach this conversation are different if technology is a profit center versus a cost center. If technology is a profit center, then you can say hey, let's get the most out of our engineers, let's help them develop new features. If we're talking about technology as a cost center, then we have to talk about risk, right? Like actually, that's a common phenomenon when you're talking to often in banks, the S3 team is under the risk management department, right? Because it's viewed as we have to keep the lights on. So I think that's kind of the tension. And in those situations, you have to position observability as this is what helps us mitigate downside risks. And also, hey, by the way, we can ship more reliably and faster, but that's not necessarily the first pitch you lead with if someone is viewing technology as a cost center. And I have to say, there are banks that view technology as a profit center, right? Like they're great, but that's not universal.
Sure.
Steven, I have a few questions. So I guess you experienced there are a few SaaS solutions. I know that there's a big German vendor selling software for financial organizations that is working on it. So they have instrumented their internal code. They want to produce their metadata for their developers. And I think the level of details that you produce as a SaaS vendor, you don't want to necessarily send that details because it won't be helpful for customers to understand where they're spending time. So I think they are starting a journey where they're going to do different type of traces just for end user, for customers who want to say, I have this, accounting process. I understand if I'm spending time, but you don't want to have the details behind the scene because it's you're not responsible for that code anymore. So have you had the chance to utilize any of those platform or these vendors that produce customer spans or traces, or at the moment you're challenging with this?
I want to keep it abstract but there's a particular product that I'm working with at the moment, and I understand what you're saying there, and I think what I want though is this is the particular application. Although it's SaaS, we are customizing code, and so I want to know application level, like what's going on
your custom code. Yeah.
Yes, on our custom code at least, right? Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I don't care about the infrastructure too much, and I want to know how long things take end to end. Yeah. So
yeah, but
I think that would be the right level.
Yeah, but at the end, it would be that your custom code, their engine should produce the right details. For then you can figure out, this custom code that you've built is slowing down the system.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which is, I think, I don't know for all the vendors, but I think vendors that are following the OTEL project or the OTEL initiatives, I think they're moving on towards that directions. But the problem is that it's always a matter of priority, I guess. I guess. And I think traces doesn't bring much business value for them on that sense. So I think it's going to be, if all the customers saying, please, 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 maybe things will change. I don't know. That's my opinion. Liz, do you have any questions for Steven?
I just mainly love your artwork, Steven. So it's always great to see presentations like that.
It's nice to fall back on that. I like joining these panels and conversations where people who are much smarter than me are talking, but at least I got my artwork to fall back on. It's good. Yeah.
No, like I don't have any. I don't really have any contentions. I'm just like, yes, this was awesome. I wish other people who are providing. Actually, here's a big one that we've actually encountered a fair bit at Honeycomb. What do you think vendors should do when they encounter trace headers that say to propagate context? Right, you implement OTEL, you have a webhook, and your webhook is calling it, and your webhook is calling another service.
Good question. I mean, I don't know if I'm answering your question right, but I would be happy to start with to just honor that and like even just at a black box level know the block time and whether things succeeded or pass across the whole thing. And then beyond that, everything else is just bonus, right? Or in terms of breaking it up about what's happening internally. Is that what you were thinking, kind of?
Sorry, no, I phrased it incorrectly. It's the other way around. Your service has just received something with OTEL trace headers, and you don't know where to send that data, right?
So you mean the call from the SaaS vendor is sending? Oh, okay.
Yeah, you've gotten callback from the SaaS vendor, and it has some OTEL trace headers, right? Do you continue the trace or do you break the trace?
The thing is, the thing is they don't have the trace anymore. So, or it means that you have sent the call to the SaaS and they continue the trace, and then you can measure the black box times, I would guess.
Yeah, the tricky situation we ran into was we were sending notifications of hey, like your service is broken or something, and we were sending trace headers, and it confounded our clients because we had sent the trace headers and they had blindly trusted the trace headers, right? And they were continuing our trace, and they had, it's I think there's this confusing semantic convention problem when everyone is OTEL.
Yeah.
And suddenly, so it sounds like you haven't encountered that situation yet.
Not yet, but I know what you mean. You're just like, he's here to continue it on. Yeah, continue it on, please. Yeah.
It's almost 1 hour and 30 minutes. So I think we are almost heading to.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat. It looks.
Yeah, it's a couple of questions. There's questions from I think it's more for you, Liz. More on AI. I'll bring that. How has AI changed the course of Observability so far? And additionally, can AI help us find bottlenecks, issues, events more accurately and timely than human eye?
A lot of venture capital money being spent on this problem right now. I think broadly, my view, I should caveat, I'm an AI pessimist, but also I'm willing to acknowledge when AI gets things right. And I think the biggest advantage has been kind of interpretability and allowing people who are not experts in observability tooling to get up to speed more quickly. I think that's where the highest value add is. Everyone already has enough systems screaming at them. We don't necessarily need more systems that are sending anomaly alerts at us than we already have. And also there's kind of this challenge of with the way that large language models work, you're not going to feed a large language model the entire input stream of all of the observability data. That would be cost prohibitive, right? Like, so you need to find more narrow applications of AI. For instance, can AI write a regular expression to extract data out of your logs? Can AI help you automatically add OpenTelemetry information to your code? So I think those are the places where there's the highest value add, and not necessarily, I expect AI to find my anomalies for me and fix them for me or alert me on them.
Yeah, and it's more for the log perspective. If you find some common patterns when when a problem occur, and then you have, I don't know, lots of logs, then you can maybe ask to say what aggregate that. I agree. Sometimes people expect a lot of things about AI, but maybe in the future. We'll see.
I also think that AI is like it enhances what you already have. If you don't already have that maturity of practice and process and being able to see what's going on and to make sense of things already as part of your org, then just throwing AI on top in any context is not necessarily going to add any value.
I saw a customer slide deck entering why they were choosing to modernize their observability, and one of the slides said AI garbage in, garbage out, and I think that accurately sums it up. If you don't have clean data, it's going to be a real pain.
But I think if you take like a Tesla has a lot of sensors, capture a lot of things, and then based on all the data that he's capturing, he's able to make a decision, like automation. And I think if we are putting the right semantic, we are indexing properly the data, then maybe in the future we can have not a Tesla, but something that it's automation. I would say more automation around the data. more than anything. All right, so I think we it's time to conclude. So thanks Liz, thanks Stephen for your time. Enjoyed your talks. I will send later on the timestamps so then people can have access to your session directly from YouTube. Yeah, I will conclude. So thanks a lot and for joining this Observable Lightning Talks, the first one edition for APAC. So thanks a lot, and hope to see you soon. See you soon. All right, so if you enjoyed this live stream, don't forget to like, subscribe, and thank you for spending this time, an hour and 30 minutes with us, and see you for another Observable Lightning Talks.